Hey, everybody, welcome back to Prince's Friend, exploring music through Prince. I actually have my friend Chris Lacy here with me again, and we are going to be discussing in a three-part discussion some of the amazing work that Prince did, 1987, 88, that era, Love Sexy Black Album. We're going to be having a really fun discussion. And I hope that your guys are going to enjoy that. So first thing I want to do, obviously, is welcome Chris back. Thank you so much for coming back. I'm glad I didn't scare you away in the last conversation.
No, man, I've been looking forward to coming back. As soon as you hit me up about doing this topic, I was excited. So thank you so much for bringing me back, man. I really appreciate it.
Not a problem. This is actually a topic I've been wanting to do for a while, and I noticed that when we were talking about Batman, we kept talking about Love Sexy. So
Right.
it was like, I was like, well, then we might as well just go ahead and talk about it then, because the Black Album and Love Sexy came up in our conversation about Batman.
That's right.
So I think that definitely tells us we need to talk about Love Sexy and the Black Album a little bit. So this video is going to be part one. It's going to be 3 videos. This one is going to be the Black Album. So for those who maybe don't know exactly the history behind the Black Album, fill us in a little bit on that, Chris.
So based on my research on the Black Album, shortly after Sign of the Times was released, it definitely got a lot of praise from critics and definitely from some fans, but there was still some grumbling within the Black community that some folks felt that he abandoned his funk roots. So out of frustration, he decided that, you know what, I'm going to put this album out. I'm going to shut all my critics up and show them, like, you can't take away my Blackness, right? That's how we ended up with the Black Album. He had been working on some songs during the making of, Sign of the Times and during the Madhouse 8 era. So some of those songs that he had already been working on made their way onto the Black Album.
Well, and I can definitely understand that aspect because honestly, if you go before the Black Album, there was Sign of the Times, which had some funk on it. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, all of his albums have a little bit of funk on it, but it was definitely more psychedelic, I guess is a good word, but it was also a lot more rock on Sign of the Times than there had been, previously. So, but if you go backwards there, then you have Parade, and Parade was, it had like New Position on it, like that's funky, but like pretty much like the whole rest of the album was very like, it was very French, and it had, there wasn't a whole lot of funk. And then before that was, Around the World in a Day, which again was less funk and more, psychedelic and whatnot. So I could see the general public who maybe isn't as entrenched in it, just kind of like dipping their toe in and going, oh, still not that funky. All right, I'll come back for the next one. Wait, is it funky? Oh, still not funky. Jeez. So I could see that happening quite a bit. But it was interesting because even in my interview that I did with the MPG, and I had asked, what was your favorite, Prince album? And Tony M said Black Album. He was like, he came back, he came and slapped you with his blackness. And, I was just like, yeah, I could see that. Yeah, I like that. I like that analogy there.
No. I agree with you. I think those that are, I won't say uninitiated because that sounds like too harsh of a term, but for the folks that aren't deeply entrenched in his discography, for those that came on board from the very beginning, or folks that jumped on around Dirty Mind, Controversy, especially in 1999, I could definitely understand some folks saying, okay, well, why isn't it as funky as those earlier albums? In that aspect, I can understand that. However, like you said, I can pretty much look at almost every album and pull something out of it that has that funk element to it, because like he was funky to his core. Like you can't take that out of his DNA.
Exactly. Like, oh my god, like it's all over the place. It's just not necessarily in the singles, I guess is the way to say it. Like if you look at the singles from Sign of the Times, it was Sign of the Times, What were the other singles off of that? You
Yeah,
Got the Look.
yeah, You Got the Look. If I Was Your Girlfriend,
If I Was
and
Your
then
Girlfriend is pretty funky, but then it didn't
yeah,
chart that much. So
and
it's
then
like
I Can Never Take the Place of Your Man. That's more pop rock, so I can
exactly,
understand that. Um,
exactly.
but yeah, but then some of the album cuts, kind of developed their own legendary reputation. Housequake, Hot Thing,
Yeah.
Ballad of Dorothy Parker. Like each of those have funk elements in them, but they sound very different.
And an interesting thing about going from Sign of the Times into the Black Album is because he had now this Love Sexy Band. It's what we call it, the Love Sexy Band.
Mm-hmm.
It was funny because when I was talking to Eric Leeds and he said that like they didn't call it the Love Sexy Band like I do, they called it the Counter Revolution, which is a fun name for it.
Yeah,
But essentially, Sign of the Times didn't have them on the album at all.
that's right.
They weren't on that album. That was actually all before them. Their first introduction to Prince in the studio and making an album was the Black Album. And Kat's on here, she's rapping. You got the sax on here from Eric. Like, honestly, like this album itself was a pretty big departure from the sound that he had, with the Revolution leading up to this.
Yeah, I agree with you. A huge chunk of the band was missing from that. I believe really the only main collaborators outside of Prince on Sign of the Times were Susanna Melvoin, and then of course Eric Leeds and Atlanta Bliss. They played the horns on a door, and It's Gonna Be a Beautiful Night.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. But yeah, it was largely Prince back to his do-it-yourself methods that a lot of people fell in love with when they first were introduced to him.
So here's the interesting thing about it was Prince only had 8 songs on here. He had gotten kind of past the whole, having 8 songs on an album. Like he hadn't had only 8 songs on an album since like Dirty Mind. It's like even like almost all the albums leading up to it had more. Like even if it was 9, it had more than that. So I always found that weird.
I agree with you. Like we were so used to seeing him like just cram as much material as he could in his projects. And I want to say off memory, I think Controversy was the last album that had 8 songs on it up to that point. And then, for a couple albums, he had 9 songs, and then I think Parade had 12. And then you bump up to Sign of the Times with 16, pushing double album material.
Exactly.
So to see him scale it back, to go from 16 songs on Sign of the Times and then scale it back to 8, you're like, wow, like it's amazing to see him show that much restraint, especially knowing the making of, Crystal Ball and then everything kind of falling apart and then trimming it down to Sign of the Times is like, for him to go from 16 to 8 songs, that was quite an act of restraint.
It was big for me because when I picked it up, I was like, wait, only 8 songs? What's up with this? Well, and you have to remember, too, that when I bought it, it was 1994. So I'm coming off of the Love Symbol album and, all those others. And those have like 15, 16 songs on a single album, not even double albums. It's like, no, it's just one album. It's not double. Let's talk favorite songs off of the Black Album.
Absolutely.
Let's jump right into that. Let's talk favorite songs. Like what would be your favorite song off of the album?
Okay, so my favorite song from the Black Album, I would also argue, is the best song on the album, and that is Bob George.
Okay, please tell me why.
Absolutely. So musically, there's nothing else that sounds like it to me in his entire catalog. He's kind of in this dark storytelling mode, and he's playing this pimp, and he kills his girlfriend, and he gets into a shootout with the police, and he's really messing around with the vocals. He's got like this deep vocal all throughout. And then you hear like the high pitched police, officers in the background. It's like, let's get the hell out of here. Like all that stuff it's great storytelling. And you can almost envision a motion picture as he's, going through the song. Yeah. It's just, it's so sparse, but yet it's so funky and there's so much detail all throughout it. That's why it stands out to me so much, is that it's extremely dark. You feel like you're watching a movie or I feel like I'm watching a movie whenever I hear that song.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see that. It also has some pretty iconic lines in it, obviously. that's skinny motherfucker with a high voice.
Yeah.
Which is a great line.
It is.
And also shows that Prince knew who he was. He was okay, being the butt of a joke, especially if it was going to be so cool. It was going to come off so well on the album.
Yeah.
I think that if I was to pick like one song that was my favorite, I would say probably Rock Hard in a Funky Place. And I think for me, it's because it was, I think, the most sexual of the songs. There was like When Two Are in Love, but like a lot of the songs on here were very dancey, which is funky, but it was very dancey, and I felt like the rest of the album kind of lost the sexiness, because it kind of replaced a lot of that sexiness with kind of like aggression. And but I felt like Rock Hard in a Funky Place kind of reclaimed that and said like, yeah, this album was kind of to shut you up, but by the way, like, I'm still just gonna mess around and be sexy and do what I'm going to do anyway. And then, of course, obviously, it has the best ending of almost any album that Prince ever released, which was the, what kind of fucking name was that anyway? It's like, oh my God, I remember listening to that as like a kid, and I just busted out laughing, and I still bust out laughing. It kind of reminds me of the Cream maxi single, where he does that the Get Some solo, and then at the end you hear Tony go like, what the fuck does that have to do with Cream? Like, it's the same kind of feeling, but it's just like, yeah, it's just music, like whatever. So I would say Rock Hard in a Funky Place was probably my favorite, and I think it's because it is the least like the rest of the songs on the Black Album, I think. And that's not to say that the Black Album's bad, but the Black Album was never my taste, my style. My pick for best song would be the one that is most unlike the rest of the songs on the album.
No, I can dig that. I can dig that choice. And for all the reasons you stated, like I absolutely love it. The one thing I really appreciate about Rock Hard in the Funky Place is the horn arrangement, because you hear that kind of woven through. Yeah. If I Can Never Take the Place of Your Man in the concert film. But yeah, like the horn parts, and then like you said, like the sexual overtones about it. I almost kind of wonder now, like, did he put it at the end of the album for a reason? Because like it's a good transition to Love Sexy, because that's what it really encompasses, I
don't know. That's a good. Well, no, because I don't know, because I think what that would do is that would assume that he knew that Love Sexy was going to be the next album, but according to all the stories that I've heard, it was kind of spur of the moment that he did, Love Sexy. And did the whole, I guess we should probably start talking about that, of the retraction of the album and going into Love Sexy and stuff. Because as far as I have heard, Prince had a spiritual epiphany and decided that he did not want that. And one of the quotes that I had heard was that an artist is often defined by the last thing that they released. And Prince was like, I don't want the Black Album to be the last thing that I released. Like, he's like, and so he must have had a brush with death or something. Like, he's like, I'm going to die tomorrow. Who knows? But he was just like, no, get the Black Album off the shelves, and here's another album instead.
Yeah, that's been the same thing that I've come across too. Matt Thorne, who wrote a biography on Prince, he's a good friend of mine. He's from the UK, and I highly recommend his book if no one's read it. He talks about just the different circumstances that were going on throughout Prince's life at that time, and it goes into to what you said about if he were to die today, like, would he want that to be be the period at the end of the sentence, basically. Right. And then, of course, the infamous rumor of him experimenting with ecstasy and then having like this huge trip, and he's like, wow, like, now, and meeting Ingrid Chavez in a club, and then Susan Rogers coming over to Paisley Park, and his eyes are like real dilated. And like, I don't know, given the fact that he was so healthy, for a good chunk of his life, again, it's I wasn't there, so it's a conspiracy theory. But I tend to lean more towards your line of thinking, which is, he's thinking in the grand scheme of things, like, is it, if I were to die today, is this the last thing that I want to leave? And he's like, nah, I want to end on a high note. So
now, at the same time, though, it does seem like it was. I mean, obviously, like later Prince would be like, "Oh, like I don't sing any of the songs off of Dirty Mind anymore." It's like that's cool, like whatever. But like, what was it about the Black Album that he's just like, no, I'm not just going to let that one go and then just hope that everybody loves the next album. No, I want it gone.
Mm-hmm.
Thing needs to die. I want it pulled off of every shelf and I want it burned. Like obviously not literally, but because here was the thing that for me really cemented the fact that Prince definitely had something against this album that he made, was that to fulfill his contract with Warner Brothers, he allowed them to re-release the Black Album as one of the albums. And they were like, cool. Well, I mean, everybody's been wanting that anyway. It's a huge collector's item. That's wonderful. And he says, okay, cool. We're going to release it in February. Any copies that aren't sold by the end of the year, they need to return them back to be destroyed. It's like, wow, like he really did do that just to fulfill the contract. And he really did not want it out there just lingering around. He was like, I want it gone. So that was one of the things when I read that, I was like, whoa, like that seems to go beyond spiritual epiphany. Like, do you know any additional information that maybe I don't know that would tell us something more to that story?
No, honestly, that I've read and the same thing and kind of pondered about it, and that I came to the same conclusion. Like he was very adamant about, hey, like once you hit this, like it's gone. Like return it back to Paisley Park, and we don't have to talk about it ever again.
Oh, and that was one other thing too. When he started, this is funny. When he started designing the different rooms in Paisley, because he was already before he passed, he was already planning to make it a museum. So he made like a Love Sexy room, a Sign of the Times room, and all that stuff. And in like the back corner, there's the Black Album room. And I remember when we were going through and we were doing the guided tour, and I was like, "Hey Tommy," I was like, all the other doors are open. How come the Black Album door isn't open? And he goes, he's like, funny thing about that, nobody really goes in there. The Black Album room is the room that like all the cabling and wires from the whole rest of the Paisley, they all feed into there. So it's like if you open the door, it's just wires and electronics in there. Like it's not really a room. But essentially, he made a whole door that said Black Album, but it's a door that you don't go into. Huh. So, and I was like, wow, like again, obviously showing that he had something against this album.
That's interesting. And again, I've yet to go to Paisley Park, and I'm kicking myself because I really want to go. But yeah, that's interesting to know that there is a Black Album room that exists, but if you were to open the door, there's nothing but cables and stuff. So
it's funny, right? Prince had a great sense of humor, I'm telling you.
He did.
So I guess to kind of round this conversation off, what do we think that this album's impact is on Prince's legacy, his career? Like, how far does this go? Like, was it huge because it was a collector's item? Like, if he had not retracted it, would have it ever been as big as it was? Like, what do you think about where it lies in the scheme of the whole thing?
Great question. It's got different layers to it. So for starters, he already had this myth, this aura about him. So for him to release an album and not even release it under his name, like he just wanted to put it out there, no text, no nothing, just put a Black Album. That's it. And then to retract it back. And then you hear, oh, wow, like, it was Warner Brothers was ready to ship it out. Now all of a sudden, he's taking it back. Like, what's going on? So then whenever, like the copies that did get shipped before it was called back, now you're like, wow, like this is a limited edition. Now he's up there with the Grateful Dead in terms of, bootlegs and
right.
Just that myth. It just adds on to the myth. And then whenever it came out in '94, people were really excited about it. And I think, but by that point, the thrill was kind of gone. at that point, because we're talking 7 years later, and he's about to start his beef with with Warner Brothers and that kind of thing, and I think also because he included it as a contractual obligation, it kind of hurt the legacy of the album a bit. Just kind of made it kind of throwaway. But overall, I think it just goes to show, with the earlier point that I made, is that you can't take funk out of this man's DNA. So for him to respond back in that way, it was a proverbial middle finger to his haters, to say, look, how dare you tell me like how black I am? Like,
yeah,
like knock it off, get out of here.
And I feel that too, and that anger is in the album. Like, that's the thing, that like the aggression and the anger, Cindy C is against all, like, any woman who doesn't want me. Dead on It's like all of the hip hopper people trying to tell me my time is done. No, yeah, y'all done already. It's like, it seemed like it was really like, it was getting down to it. Like, it was like, maybe I don't want this album associated with me, because I was calling out a lot of people that honestly, in the end, I love all of these people, but I was just angry in the moment, so.
I had read online somewhere, and I don't know if this is 100% true, but you can let me know if you've heard the same thing. And I'm curious to see what your folks have to say in the comments below, is that the name Bob George, you have his manager, Bob Cavallo, and then Nelson George, who was a very popular critic at that time, who kind of was the inspiration for Prince approaching the Black Album the way that he did. Is that, Nelson George is a very esteemed critic, even today. So to take Bob and George and then smash it together, like, I wonder, was that the inspiration for the name of the song?
Wow. Honestly, that's the first time I've heard that.
Okay.
No, I mean, but if you put it in those terms, that kind of makes sense, because as far as I know, Prince and Bob Cavallo did not end on good terms. I didn't know about the Nelson George, you said?
Yeah, Nelson George. He was a critic for Billboard magazine, and he, if I can find the piece, I'll send it to you. But he was talking about how Prince's blackness was kind of in question because of the albums that he had made before. It's like, like where's that raw funk that we heard in the early '80s?
It makes sense that the George part is there.
Yeah.
So that's a definite. Bob. It could be Bob Cavallo, or it could just be that Bob is like a really generic name. Though Prince was pretty known for, doing very deliberate things in his lyrics. So if he was going to call a character Bob George, there obviously was a reason for it. But I've never really, it's weird. Like, I'm not even going to say like, I didn't know that. I never even questioned it. Like, like, that's not even anything I've ever investigated. Like, why is this character's name Bob George? I was just like, I thought that was just the name. Like, that makes sense though.
and I'm also thinking in the opening lyric of Bob George, he's talking about, what's he do for a living? Manage rock stars. Who? Prince? Ain't that like that whole thing? It sounds like real life Bob that he's describing,
Yeah, no, I like that. I'm gonna have to do more research on that then. I like that. All right, so I think that's gonna conclude our conversation about the Black Album. So everybody, you need to tune in for part 2, where we're gonna talk about Lovesexy. Before you jump to that video, go ahead and hit like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell notification so you always know when Princess Friend puts out a new video. And check out the Patreon at patreon.com/princessfriend. And I'm going to cut all of the ending spiel off there so you can go watch the next video. We'll see you later. May you live to see the dawn. Bye.